Hey, thank you, Sarah, and hello, everyone. Great to see you all. My name is Julia Maxwell, and I'm going to get us started off with our slides. Can everybody see my screen? Let me go into slideshow mode here. Still good? Perfect. Okay. This is Time Will Tell, Innovative Approaches to OER Student Savings. I already mentioned my name. I'm a social sciences librarian at Rutgers University in New Brunswick, New Jersey, and I'm joined by two of my colleagues, Lily Todorinova, undergraduate librarian and open educational research librarian at Rutgers, New Brunswick, and Zara Wilkinson, reference and instruction librarian at Rutgers University, Camden. And we are also all members of our open and affordable textbooks team at Rutgers, which we will be discussing today. So a quick overview and agenda. We're going to talk first a little bit about some of the best practices and literature that we synthesize to kind of go through and understand the topic of student savings in the open education realm. Then we're going to use our university and our open and affordable textbooks initiative as sort of a case study to jump into a discussion about moving beyond traditional metrics of assessments of affordability. And then finally, we will round our session out with some questions and answers. We have some questions for all of you. We hope that you have questions for us. And so we will wrap up with a Q&A. But before we begin, we are interested in generating a little word cloud from all of you. So I'm going to open up a Mentimeter poll in a moment, but we would love to know what kinds of strategies do you use to assess program savings? If you don't have a program that you work with currently, what kind of strategies would you use or have you used to assess savings in an open education environment? And let me share my Mentimeter poll here. And I also have the link in the chat. So please feel free to either click the link in the chat. Big spreadsheet. All right, we're already off to a good start. Either use the link in the chat or menti.com and use the code up at the top of your presentation screen. Excellent. Okay, these answers are making me chuckle. Need ideas, great. This is fascinating. So I'm seeing a lot of Airtable, some spreadsheets. Jennifer in the chat says, oh, this is making me feel more seen already. Us too, as presenters, we feel very seen. Speaking for all three of us, I think we can all say we feel very seen by this. Yes, spreadsheet, comparing textbook costs, right? I see some data dashboard. I see we broke Excel. Yes, we are doing a lot of sending spreadsheets back and forth. Yeah, so I think that it looks like a lot of us are in the same boat, which is that, you know, we're trying to use these tools that maybe are not quite cut out for what we are leveraging them for. And I'm seeing a lot of sigh, neglect, we broke it, and those feelings of frustration or of stuckness, maybe, I think are you know, as we said in the chat, you know, this is kind of, we're all feeling seen, we're all seeing this in each other. So this was both for us to understand like where everyone in this group is coming from, but also hopefully to commiserate a little bit and validate that this is an experience that we're, you know, a lot of us are undertaking, which is how to assess savings when traditional means of assessment are really not working too well for a lot of us, it looks like. Okay, back to my slides. I'm going to save this though. I feel like I need to screenshot this to like remind us when we're feeling feeling frustrated. All right, and I'm going to let Lily go ahead and take over.
Thanks, Julia. Hi, everyone. So I wanted to discuss briefly findings that we've made in the literature to kind of determine what has been written about this topic and to understand what are some best practices and standard methods people are using out there to assess student savings. It seems like very common strategies are those listed on the slide. So people are looking at before and after cost comparisons using the cost of the textbook and then seeing how that contributes to student savings. We do know that more than half the states have funded initiatives to develop and deploy OER, and there are some pretty overt mandates to have assessment and to have return on investment metrics here. We also know that about 70% of state and system OER programs utilize that standard method of before and after costs comparison. So one of the things that, of course, these standard methods highlight is the fact that there's much more beyond these numbers that could be measured. But for a variety of reasons, we're kind of sticking to these before and after cost comparisons. So in addition to this, we also thought it would be kind of fun to ask our OEN community through our Google group. Many of you, I'm sure, get those OEN messages. And we thought it would be kind of fun to know, just very informally with a Google survey, if, what other things people are doing or thinking about out there. And being procrastinators, we didn't have a lot of time for this survey, this informal data collection, but we did get some interesting few results here, and we wanted to capture those on the slide. The words messy, labor intensive, and difficult, some said unique, definitely come up, and they also resonate in terms of our experience. We know that it's important to collect this data. It's important because we're told it's important by our administrators. We also know because we see so much value in these OER programs, and we want to be able to tell that story. But we find that we're not alone in this, that we're not really set up to collect this data in a long-term way or in a way that's keeps us sane out there. And so to give you more context about that, we'll talk a little bit more about the OER program at Rutgers. So this program started in 2016. It is a pretty typical, in a sense, faculty incentive grant program. We offer a small monetary amount for faculty who want to replace their typical traditional materials with OER, library materials, or some combination of those. And we do use a savings model that's a before and after cost savings comparison. So we used to feel, pretty stable in that approach, in that we just kind of took a look at the effect of the program in a limited basis for a year and seeing what effect it produced on student savings. However, and Zara will talk more about this, we were urged by our administrators to look at this more of a cumulative savings approach. So not just a year, but what is the impact of this program over time? I'll turn it over to you, Zara.
Great, thanks, Lily. So as Lily said, thus far, from 2016 to 2023 or so, we were using this before and after model where we calculated savings for one award cycle and then kind of added those together. But in early 2024, we were charged with moving to a cumulative savings model to fully track savings over time. Our university librarian was concerned that the model we were using was underreporting savings, and therefore that we had the promise or the potential to be reporting a higher number of savings, thus far making our program seem even more impactful than the number we had been using with our stakeholders. So we undertook this process by breaking it into two parts. First and kind of most complex, we wanted to report retroactive cumulative savings, since that was something that our university librarian was very concerned with. So we wanted to fill in the gaps for that 6.5 million savings number that we had been using with the before and after model. And then secondly, we wanted to make a plan to track ongoing cumulative savings into the future. So as many of you mentioned, we already had a big spreadsheet. For each course, we had amount of savings per student. So what we really needed for this process was real enrollment numbers over time. This was no small task. We knew we couldn't do it alone. We tried to turn to the Office of Institutional Research, but they didn't have the capacity. So we ended up going into a partnership with the Office of the Executive Vice President of Academic Affairs. We were able to work with a data analyst from that office who could pull data from the Central University Enrollment Database. He was able to attempt to match our big spreadsheet with enrollment data from the database. He was able to partially automate this process, but he still had to do some manual work with our health sciences division as that data was in a separate database. Our program had been around since 2016, so one of our big challenges was determining how much time to include in our analysis. Without asking our every single awardee, we had no way of knowing exactly who was still using their open and affordable materials, hopefully all of them, but we didn't have real data on that. So after consulting with our data analyst, we thought that we would use a 3-year window. We were afraid that using too long a time frame would artificially inflate our savings, whereas using too short a timeline would shortchange us and underreport our savings. So it may not surprise you that with everything I just described, that this process proved even more complicated than we anticipated. And there's a few reasons for that. We can't get into all of them here. I'd say by and large, the main reason, and Lily mentioned this, was that our record keeping thus far was just not intended for this purpose. We were keeping that big spreadsheet with the goal of recording single award cycle savings. We didn't have all of the data points that we needed to fully run our retroactive savings. We had information spread across 2 spreadsheets. And in some cases, as I mentioned, we weren't collecting things that because we hadn't been using them before. An example of that is a course number, which is something that our previous savings process didn't incorporate, but which is the most reliable way to pull a course out of the central database. We also had some applications that were for multiple courses. So we had to make sure, or for cross-listed courses, so we had to make sure our data analyst was pulling all of the courses included and all of the sections that may have been cross-listed. We also had a really big complicating factor, which is something that we've called curriculum developers, which are faculty members or instructional designers who control the curriculum for multiple sections of a course or for multiple courses in a program. And these proved really impactful applications. A lot of these had a really high number of savings, but they were also really complicated for our data analyst because in many cases, we didn't have an exact number of sections impacted, especially if the number of sections offered changed over time as the class maybe got more popular with students. And we also usually didn't know the instructors of record if they were different from the person who had applied. So that this is something that we are still tackling. Go to the next slide. So we have been doing a lot of spreadsheet wrangling. We've been trading spreadsheets back and forth since we received our initial savings estimate from our data analyst back in April. It's been 6 months of very close work, matching information on spreadsheets to information from the applications we received, sometimes as far back as 2016, matching data to course catalogs and other sources of information. So this has been kind of a grueling process. One of the main things we've been trying to do with that initial spreadsheet given to us by the data analyst is identify discrepancies and when appropriate, providing new information or more context that would help the analyst get more accurate numbers. Partway through the process, quite recently actually, we identified about 19 courses that we didn't realize were just missing from that first spreadsheet we were given. And so we had to kind of stop everything. Everything came to a screeching halt. While we looked at what had happened, we sent the list back to the data analyst, along with as much information as we could provide about the missing courses. And he was able to find a little over half of them, which was proved to be a really important step And we were glad we had paused everything because it added about $977,000 to our savings estimate. So we are still doing a final review to come to a final cumulative savings number, but our tentative number on the most recent big spreadsheet that we've shared sits at around $13 million. So we've about doubled our reported savings number. We're pretty happy about this. We think our university librarian will be too. We are set to present a report of our entire process and findings to our leadership team in November. But we know that that's only step one. We also need to set a plan for ongoing tracking of cumulative savings. So in November, we will be surveying all of our OAT awardees from 2016 to present, which is somewhere around 170 faculty members. And we are going to be asking about their use of open and affordable course materials after their initial award cycle. We hope this will provide self-reported data that will give context to the calculations that we've already made. And we're particularly curious to find out whether and for how long they're using their open and affordable course materials after that initial award cycle. We had to use our best judgment to come to that 3-year window for calculation's sake. So we want more information to find out whether this is a reasonable time frame or whether it's too long or too short. We're also aiming to use this initial survey as a proof of concept for an ongoing survey that we hope to do every year in order to track cumulative savings going forward. So we are hoping to find out every year if their courses are still being run, still using open and affordable materials, still generating savings, and then to track those enrollment numbers, probably in another very big, getting bigger spreadsheet. In the meantime, we'll also be revising our application process to facilitate the cumulative savings calculation. So we're gathering the information that we realized that would have helped this process. And so lastly, we wanted to acknowledge that we've been focusing a lot of attention on student savings and on cumulative savings because that was our very explicit charge. But we're also really aware, as Lily was speaking about, that savings aren't the only metric that you can use to talk about the impact of OER. And in fact, they may not even be the best way to measure the impact of OER. So we wanted to end by really briefly thinking about what kind of impact might be obscured by a focus on savings metrics. So here are some that we thought of: student and faculty satisfaction, the degree to which students are meeting learning goals, course completion rates, DEF and withdrawal rates, the ability to foster student-centered and inclusive pedagogies, including a focus on DEI, and then encouraging and enabling students to reinvest in their education. And we'd love to hear some ideas that you have about this as well.
Thank you, Zara. So, so that kind of wraps up our formal slides. We have about 7 minutes, I think, left in our time with you all. So we would love to, we have some question prompts here for all of you, but we would also love to open the floor for questions for us. So if there are burning questions that you have based on what we just shared, or any other information that we can address now, feel free to either raise your hand or throw your questions in the chat. And then we can also, maybe after we address some of those questions, if we have time, move into some of these prompts we have here too as well. Oh, one question in the chat. Oh yeah, Lori, I think, is talking about the nuanced measures are time consuming to gather but impactful. I think about student engagement measures with using OER versus traditional materials. Yes, definitely speaking to some of Zara's points about the traditional metrics versus more kind of nuanced or holistic metrics. Another question in the chat: how are you accounting for institutional costs like staffing into the savings? Good question. Lily and Zara, do you have any input on that one?
Yeah, I mean, the short answer is that we're not, because we have a pretty explicit mandate to just look at the cumulative savings that are created as a result of this program. But I agree that this could be a much bigger, more meaningful kind of conversation. And I would be curious to see how staffing could factor into just librarian labor in general. How could that factor into increased savings, increased student satisfaction, decreased drop rates, all of the above. And I just, and I wonder to what extent, which is alluded by our questions here, to what extent we're kind of over relying on that simple calculation, like other places, it sounds like.
We have another question in the chat. How do you or other people share out the data that you find? We were looking into a dashboard, but weren't able to do that in a non-labor intensive way. Yeah, definitely labor comes up a lot in these scenarios.
So at this point, because this is our first attempt at this cumulative savings model, we haven't really shared it out to the university. We've shared out a number, but not exactly like how we got to that number. So I see that as a really great next step to have something like a dashboard. But it's going to be interesting to see if that becomes part of the mandate or not, which I guess could also raise some questions.
We do have another question that I think is really starting to make my gears turn in my brain, which is, if you could start from the beginning, what key metrics would we track or automate from the outset? No, I'm a little newer to the program, but Lily and Zara, I think, do you have any thoughts about that?
I mean, yeah, hindsight would have been so nice because we would have saved ourselves a lot of guessing, knowing that this program has been around since 2016 and that we weren't even consistently collecting course numbers, for instance. Like, I would for sure make sure to collect those. I think what I would do, and this is just my answer here, personally, is I would have instituted a survey or some kind of a method of collecting this information from the faculty directly at the end of the year versus waiting several years and then trying to kind of go back. So I know other institutions, I know Open Oregon, for instance, has this really great method of checking back with people engaged with OER work every single year, which is labor intensive for sure. But I think that's really the only way to know what the status of those classrooms is.
And likewise, those curriculum developers, I think those applications were really exciting when we received them, because in a lot of cases, it was every section of an intro course, or it was every section of Bio 1 and Bio 2. And so those were really impactful, really high savings applications. But, in retrospect, if we had been collecting a little more information about who exactly was teaching those sections and how many sections were being offered over time, a lot of times in the application, that data was a little fuzzy. They might say every section offered in spring 2017, but we really didn't have a way to translate that to future semesters. So I think a little more specificity in some of those metrics would have been really useful as we undertook this process.
Seeing some other really great conversation and questions in the chat. I know we're running up on 1 more minute. I guess I'll just pull from the one that was next, which is Anne Marie asks, did the savings focus that we encountered from our charge contribute to the commercial publishers suggesting that auto billing solves the affordability problem? Which we're definitely seeing that at Rutgers. We're seeing this first day program where students are auto billed for their textbooks, and we've had a lot of separate conversations about that. But that's something really interesting that I don't think we necessarily had tied to this particular project. Correct me if I'm wrong, Lily and Zara. And so, yeah, maybe that is a really interesting kind of counter narrative to the auto billing genesis that we're seeing as well. Yeah, definitely. Okay, so that was our time. quickly just share some references. Our slides should be also uploaded. And feel free to reach out to us as well if you'd like to discuss this further. Thank you so much.